This conference will now be recorded.
I started now. I started recording. I think it's everything what the microphone and the sound. Okay. Now the second, the one projector and the TV show the cameras. If you want to share the presentation, just move just share the screen and record. You can capture the okay.
Όλα εντάξει.
Νομίζω, ξέρω εγώ. Έχω κάποια παρουσίαση κάποιου που μου λένε πριν από λίγο. Οπότε καλύτερα να την κατεβάσω εδώ. Ναι, κατευθείαν τώρα που δεν μας βλέπει κιόλας.
Ναι, νομίζω ανάμεσα θα
Ναι, γι' αυτό είπα να έρθω νωρίτερα. Έχει τίποτα ιδιαίτερο να πούμε Θόδωρος.
Πολύ ξένο, ότι να
ναι, ιστορία. Έχει κάτι ιδιαίτερο να προσέξουμε. Θα έχουμε, νομίζω, καμιά δεκαριά.
Ναι, μου είπαν 10-15.
Ναι.
Περίπου γνωρίζουν, νομίζω, ποιες πιο εργαστικοί θα πάνε ο καθένας από αυτούς. Γιατί εμείς δεν έχουμε κάποια λίστα. Νομίζω ήδη με το registration τους γνωρίζουν.
Πιθανόν, δεν ξέρω τι έχουν κάνει. Ελπίζω να έχουν κάνει registration, αλλά πάντως εγώ σε κάποιον από εσάς δήλωσα όταν μας είπε η Χριστιανά να δηλώσουν. Δήλωσα κάποια βασικά ονόματα. Είναι σκόπιμα η πόρτα κλειστή.
Την έχει ανοίξει ένας φίλος εδώ και μετά να την κρατήσουμε ανοιχτή. Δεν ξέρω από τον αέρα αν ανοίξει. Μέχρι όσο το ερχόμουν ήταν ανοιχτή.
Ναι, μάλλον μπορεί να καταλάβει.
Έχουν όμως το pass στα meetings. Τους δίνουμε το στρογγυλόν που το περνάμε.
Πρέπει να κάνουμε πρώτα εγγραφή, δηλαδή.
Θεωρώ ότι έχουν κάνει οι περισσότεροι. Και η λίστα που μας έδωσε η κυρία Τάκη επίσης νομίζω είναι.
Μπορεί, εντάξει, δεν το ξέρω.
Δεν πειράζει. Αν έχει κάτι, θα έχουμε να
τα ναι, άλλωστε οι 3-4 που είναι να έρθουν εκτός Ινστιτούτου, δεν ξέρουν, έχουν το τηλεφωνόμο. Εντάξει, αν προτιμάτε δηλαδή, αν προτιμάτε να είναι κλειστή για οτιδήποτε λόγο, φροντίζετε.
Το Ινστιτούτο να είναι επιχειρήν, εμείς νομίζω προτιμούμε να είναι ανοιχτή.
Εντάξει. Ξέρω εγώ. Νομίζω πως ναι. Εγώ σκοπεύω να έχουμε χαλαρό. Είχαμε τόσο φυγή με διάφορα άλλα τελευταίες μέρες και εντάξει, το κυρίως είναι ότι ήταν πιο επίσημο, οπότε εδώ...
Αύριο.
Θα μπορεί κάποιος να κάνει screen sharing από αυτούς που συμμετέχουν online.
Δεν ξέρω να ρωτήσουμε.
Ναι, θα το ρωτήσουμε.
Ναι. Ναι, θα πάρουμε τη μάλια.
Ναι.
Άρα θα το βλέπουν και online. Το και έχουμε και άλλα λόγια.
Θα το βλέπουν online. Ναι, 2 ομιλητές θα είναι online.
Ναι.
Οπότε για τη μια έχω τα slides και είπε ότι θα προτιμούσε και η ίδια να τις τα δηλώσουμε εγώ. Γεια σας, καλησπέρα. Γιατί εντάξει, ο ένας από τους δύο που είναι online μου στείλε τις παρουσιάσεις και μου είπε ότι προτιμά να τις αλλάσουμε εμείς και να είναι εκείνη, αλλά ο άλλος μπορεί, αν βάζει τις slides, μπορώ να του το πω, αλλά να έχουμε την καλύτερη ευελιξία, ναι. Δεν είναι θέμα των δικών μας των αριθμών, δηλαδή. Γιατί είναι αυτό. Πρέπει να δώσεις ένα permission, ας πούμε, αλλά αυτά συνήθως τα δίνει ο άγγελος. Αλλά τώρα, ναι. Γιατί είναι στο GoToMeeting το link, οπότε το GoToMeeting εμείς το χειριζόμαστε. Ναι, απλώς να ξέρουμε αν θα γίνεται.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε, να στείλουμε τον τεχνικό δεύτερο ώρα. Το θέμα είναι ότι λίγο
νομίζω ότι δεν χρειάζεται να έρθει εδώ. Γιατί με το που κάποιος προσθέσει το τέλος να πούμε αν έχει δώσει πρόσβαση σε οτιδήποτε να κάνει στην ουσία ή εκείνη την ώρα να τον κάνει present. Γιατί μπορεί να μην είμαι σίγουρος εγώ να το κάνω και δεν έχω. Δεν ξέρω αν έχει
όχι, να θα μιλήσω με έναν τεχνικό. Εντάξει, θα μιλήσω με έναν τεχνικό. Αν δεν κάποιο μπορούμε να το βοηθήσω.
Θέλετε να σας είναι το link μας το έπρασε στην Άννα. Η δεύτερη σου να κάνει σε αυτό. Να πω μήπως έγινε εντελώς εσωτερικά.
Εντάξει, να το δώσω να σας πω.
Ναι.
Δεν ξέρω στο μεταξύ, για να μην κοινωνήσω. Ναι, εντάξει.
καλύτερα πάρκαρε απ' έξω, ας πούμε, το γυμναστήριο. Ναι, μπράβο. Ναι. Έχει ένα...
جو بس امتى ما بدك
Ναι, νομίζω ίσως είναι καλύτερα να κάτσει κανείς από εκεί. Ναι. Δεν έχουμε μιλήσει τώρα για αυτά. Και επειδή δεν τα workshop, καταλαβαίνετε ότι φτιάχτηκαν την τελευταία στιγμή. Ναι, και πρώτα όλα το σημαίνει. Αυτό ήταν η παρουσίαση στο θέμα. Όχι, απλώς επειδή τελευταία στιγμή σας ψάξαμε και το χαρακτήρα ήταν ένα workshop όπως το ανοιχτό κείμενο. Εδώ μας είναι φактή το κανάλι. Ο οποίος μόνο με πει ότι δεν μπορεί να κάνει είναι ελάχιστη. Hi, Ron. Hi. Will you check about the GoToMeeting, whether there is a screen sharing? Yes. Will there be a presentation? Yeah. There will be a presentation here, which I have. An online person will make the presentation, but I will change the slides because it was her request. But there is another person attending online who may have a presentation. I don't know. So we would like to make sure that it's possible. Is it difficult? No.
So who will present first? You will present her first, or?
What order? I don't know. I will present her. I will not present myself, but I will present. I will switch on the slide. So,
Okay, so the copy is local. It's here.
yes, it's also yes. But in order to allow for the other person to have,
You can just share.
them.
They can actually just share from them. But
in any case, without any permission or anything.
Yes, they will just share their screen and it will come up.
Okay. Okay. So they are. We don't need to give them any permission to share their screen.
But it will be on the screen, not.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So he asks that I change the slides. The second person sent me the PDF because the PowerPoint was large. But I think this guy would prefer to share. But he has the GoToMeeting link, so he can share. Okay.
I'll be outside.
Yes. Okay. In case something occurs.
Can we present here?
Here, please.
You mean with slides?
No. My presentation is on my laptop, so if I send from there, I need to take my laptop there.
But he doesn't have a presentation. Just
where I will just
say this.
There's no slides. But I don't have anything. I have a copy, so I need this.
Okay. But you will not be showing to this. Okay. So is it better if he stands there, or can he talk from here? Yeah.
Easier.
This is the microphone to transmit to the online participants. This is the microphone over here.
Okay. So which means that
I have both.
okay, he can have them both here, and I can be here. Can I be here? Here.
This one is for here. And this for online.
Okay.
But don't touch this because we'll mute
Everyone. Rabia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Excellent.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. I don't know, but you can't see us probably.
I can see you.
this one pointing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we have this person on the right is Mr. Elinas from the Atlantic Council, and
Hello.
Uh,
this is Mr. Ruki from the International Renewable Agency.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You'll do yours remotely, I suppose.
Yes, 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 from Abu Dhabi.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I have your presentation, Rabia, so we will be
Thank you so
possible.
much.
You can just order me to change slides, and we will do this.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you so much.
And let me see. How can we make this full screen? This is a PDF, Ron, but it's not with Acrobat. If we just switch. Sorry. We have to switch the. Or we can make it open with Acrobat. It's in download. Which one? Yes, this one. Close this. Exactly. So we can use control there. Okay. I'm going to screen share.
All keyboard has access to screen sharing, and for your screen sharing, you want to click.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
How do I maximize one?
Huh?
How do I maximize?
Control.
Control it. Okay, yes.
Okay.
So
What? You want?
So if I present here,
You just present.
I just
yeah,
present.
go on. Share the screen. So you
Okay.
come here, share. Select the 7.
The screen is like this.
Okay. Okay, keep it for now.
No, we'll share.
Okay. Megan, let me put the presentation, share the screen, okay? Okay. If someone has a question, just I want for this map. Okay? Maxi?
Ναι, ευχαριστούμε, Άγγελε.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks.
So I have one PowerPoint which I will present, and I have one PDF which I will present only if necessary. Otherwise, the online person will present. Okay. And so I need to tell you when to share the screen, right? Okay. Then
Once you display it, then I will share it now.
yes. Okay. Then I will also download this.
Τι γίνεται?
So can you share now the screen?
Καλή ιδέα. Τα δικά μας που κοντά.
Hello, Steve. Steve, can you hear us? Okay, can you stop sharing so that I can look at the participants? Because how can I look at the participants?
Yo lo hice de esa manera, lo hice. Entonces, ahora no me suena de eso,
Eso ya lo regalará.
Steve, can you hear us? We can't hear you, but I don't know whose problem this is. Steve Griffiths. He seems to have the microphone on.
You hear me now?
Yes. Yes, right.
Okay. Okay, I'll use this other microphone. Okay.
Okay. And as I just wrote to you, you can most probably present yourself, but if necessary, I can see the PDF.
Okay.
Okay. So let's give it another 3 minutes, I think. You are available for 1 hour and a half, right?
Yes, until 4 o'clock UA time, correct.
Okay, yes. So Rabia, is there anything about the conference? So that now that we meet and we have a few minutes time that you would like to ask, I think the agenda is pretty clear for Wednesday, I mean.
Yeah, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Rabia, how are you?
Fine, how are you? Long time no see, huh?
Oh, I say that to many people these days.
Yeah.
It's been another world for years.
Yeah.
So are you going to Cyprus for the conference, Rabia?
No, Steve, I can't. I have to travel, so yeah, I won't. Are you?
No, it's still, we've had some challenges with our budget for travel, to be honest.
Already.
Maybe next year.
Yeah.
It's been idea that at least for 2021 that travel is not necessary, so.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. It's the same a bit with us as well.
Holger, hello. Nice to meet you.
Hello, hello. Yeah, well, a bit difficult here at the airport, but yeah, somehow we'll manage.
Thank you for joining for the time that you can, and as well as you can. We have asked another person as well about your hotel booking. As I told you, of course, it's
Yes.
not good to have a last-minute plan, but I am almost sure that we will know tonight, so that you shouldn't worry about it. Normally, you should also receive information about the transportation from the airport to the hotel.
Yeah. Well, that's probably more important, the transportation.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Don't worry. I think this will be a package, your accommodation and the transportation. So don't worry. And if there is any difficulty, we will ask Konstantinos to make the transportation. So you have your connections here. Θα σου πει να ξεκινήσουμε, γιατί είναι αμαρτία οι δυο online άνθρωποι. Πας να τους πεις να έρθουν μέσα. Okay. Let's just coordinate the different screens. So welcome to our hybrid pre-conference workshop on decarbonizing energy systems. Welcome to people attending in person. We have about 10 people. So that's more or less the capacity of the room. And the rest are online in different screens and in different formats. Special thanks to our visitors, physical visitors, but our online visitors as well. So this is one of the workshops that are held prior to the climate change conference for climate change in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. And we are very happy to welcome you, and some of you have contributed a lot to the thematic report of the Task Force on Energy Systems in the region. And I would like to thank you especially for your contributions. We were initially asked to have two distinct, say, rounds of discussion on research priorities and on policy priorities. This also follows the format of some presentations that we will have tomorrow afternoon. But since the workshop is meant to be informal, and some of you consider themselves more experts in policy than in research, or vice versa, I think we can also be more relaxed in the structure of the presentations. And I think that most of you have one presentation, either with slides or oral. So perhaps you can go on with your presentation, and then we will open the floor to the audience, to the physical and online audience for discussion. So we are very pleased to have with us online Rabia Faruqi, Director at the International Renewable Energy Agency in Abu Dhabi, who has been one of the coordinators of the Energy Task Force as well. And thank you very much for joining us today under these difficult circumstances, and also thank you very much for your contribution to the report. And we also have online Professor Steve Griffiths, Vice President for Research at Khalifa University at the United Arab Emirates. He has also been a member of the Energy Task Force and has contributed also a lot and has read very substantially and has provided very useful comments and input to the report. So welcome, Steve. And with physical presence, we have Dr. Charles Elinas, who is a Cypriot, but he's also a member of the Atlantic Council, the Global Energy Center of the Atlantic Council as non-resident senior fellow. And he has been an expert in natural gas, but also he's very active in policy briefs on decarbonizing energy systems in the region. And we also have with us Professor Kamal Araj, also attending in person, a vice chairman, or perhaps a former vice chairman of the Jordanian Atomic Energy Commission. He has also been a coordinator of the Energy Task Force of the Climate Initiative and has contributed a lot. So thank you for being with us. As I said, the two main topics are what and how to on coordinating energy research in the region. So we have identified in the report some of the gaps, the knowledge gaps for decarbonizing energy systems. But the main question here is not what is needed globally to advance research in different aspects, but especially what would be relevant in the region, and especially what would be relevant in a coordinated manner that would enable national collaboration in different research items in the, for decarbonizing our energy systems. And the second topic is how we could formulate perhaps a coordinated policy response. So one on knowledge and research, and one on policy. But as I said, in order to facilitate the discussion and not having too many rounds with this hybrid format, we can start with interventions from each one of the four panelists. You can intervene on the topic that you prefer, and or perhaps on both topics. And then we could go on with questions and discussion with the audience, and perhaps further interventions, in order to be as flexible as possible and to respect also the time limitations of everyone. So perhaps we could start with Rabia. I can change your slides. I will put them on.
Theo, I think this is the last slide. So does that mean we're starting with policy?
We can start with each one's expertise. So you can talk about policy, and we can mix the discussion afterwards in order not to have too many rounds. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Can you see our screen, Rabia?
Yeah, I can. Can you see me?
Yes, yeah? Excellent. Thank you. Okay,
great. Thank you again, Theo, and thank you for the opportunity to have been part of this nice exercise. I'm going to talk a little bit about policy, and I'm going to try to every time look at the global framework that IRENA proposes as laid out in the latest flagship publication, the VETO, the World Energy Transition Outlook, published last June, and then related to the region. So if you go to the next slide, you will see that this is the 1.5 pathway that IRENA proposes, the trajectory to 2050, and our analysis shows basically very briefly that 70% of the solutions involve renewables, electrification, and energy efficiency, with the rest being covered with green hydrogen, bioenergy combined with CCS. And if you look in the middle of the slide, then achieving this transition basically globally requires $131 trillion. That's about 33 trillion compared to the existing planned trajectory. And the analysis shows also that the 1.5 transition pathway globally expands GDP by an average 1.2% per year until 2050, improves welfare by 11%, The welfare index, the ARENA welfare index, was done in order to sort of look at a measure that goes beyond GDP, and substantially increases sector job, which would be over 120 million by 2050, with about 40, let's say 40 to 45 million in renewable energy. So if you look at the next slide, that's MENA related, and unfortunately, we don't have the regional breakdown yet from the 1.5 pathway. So this pathway is the one we did the year before, which is well below 2 degrees, but it's not a 1.5 degree. So interesting, obviously, having global results hides a lot of differences between regions and countries. And here you see on the well below 2 degrees pathway, it shows that the investments on the left, the percentage of investment to transform the transition, with only 6% for the MENA region. The interesting part is that it does reduce, obviously, emission and local air pollution. It diversifies energy supply and focuses on high-value exports. It looks at a more diversified economy, and of course looks at local job creation and local value added. Now you can see on the slide that GDP in most regions actually is increasing. In this region, it is slightly decreasing by 1.2%, mostly due to the fact that the positive investments are unable, which is front-loaded investment in renewable energy, for example, are unable to offset the negative effects on trade, indirect and induced effect within different economies, etc. Obviously, unless appropriate policies are introduced quite fast. Welfare does improve like everywhere else, but that's sort of an easy one because that welfare index includes the environment and climate environmental impact. So, and in particular, the health improvement as a result of the transition. The energy sector in the MENA by 2050, at the time for the well below 2 degrees, is about 7 to 7.5 million jobs, which is an addition of about 700 to 800,000 people. 2 million in renewable energy. But I think the main point I would like to make is that the realizing a just transition with maximizing benefits really requires a more comprehensive and coordinated policy framework. And this includes not only the deployment policies, which we continuously, or integrating policies, which we continuously talk about, but also cross-cutting and structural change policies. So if you like to the next one, please. Very briefly, this is what you can find in our veto. This is globally the pathway that I just showed you with renewables, efficiency, electrification, etc., and the policies that are required, the action items that are required. So that doesn't include just market creation and financial incentive, but all of these facilitating deployment. Oh, so beyond the deployment policy, if you can go to the next one, which will facilitate the deployment of renewables in particular. Here we looked at the EMME region, which is, of course, we all know, we've all worked on this report. But just to point out that some countries are already formulating a policy framework to move towards a more sustainable energy future. And among what we call the deployment policies or direct policies that support the deployment, we have some interesting examples, and you see the flags on the left with countries like Bahrain, Egypt, Greece, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia. I'm not going to mention all of them, but that are contracting solar and wind energy capacity through auctions. These auctions have resulted in record prices for CSP in Morocco and solar PV in the UAE, in Egypt, in Jordan, and Tunisia. Some countries like Morocco are using local content requirements in auctions to strengthen domestic value chains and add domestic value and jobs. And then you have countries like Cyprus, Egypt, Greece, Jordan, Lebanon, etc., who have been using net metering to support distributed solar production. This was just to give a couple of examples of those deployment policies that are supporting sort of a more sustainable deployment energy future. Now, if you looked at the next one, the next sort of set of policies that we talk about are the cross-cutting ones, and they're really necessary because they cut across all technologies, and they include all sorts of measures like ambitions and which issue clear signals to stakeholders, facilitate access to financing, affordable financing, phase out fossil fuels, and eliminate distortions to and incentivize the uptake of sustainable solutions. So if you look at the EMME region, again, next slide, please. Here you see that the policy framework in the region also includes these policies that create a wider conducive environment. Almost all of the EMME region has countries have announced RE targets. Several countries have renewable energy specific and R&D centers, which I'm sure my colleagues will talk about more better than myself. But as technology deployment continues, integrating policies that facilitate greater shares of renewables, we all know, is essential. And we have seen in Lebanon 3 solar PV plus battery projects with capacity between 70 and 100 megawatts that have been auctioned, which is very interesting. Storage projects are contracted in the UAE, in Israel, etc. Policymakers in the EMME, I think, and the rest of the world, I would say, because I don't think it's typical for the region, need really to accelerate the efforts to facilitate the transition through these more enabling or cross-cutting policies. So if you can go to the next one. I wanted to focus a little bit, just a few minutes on challenges, because beyond deployment and cross-cutting policy, there is really a need for additional policies to address the potential challenges that may arise with the transition. I think we don't speak about it enough. Maybe we speak about it in for technologies, but not necessarily from a broader policy point of view. And particularly because different countries have different starting points, and these can be addressed by structural change and just policy transition. So, as I said, the energy transition will bring with it challenges like any deep structural change that happens in an economy, and this will be in the form of misalignments but not only in the energy sector and the power system, but also in finance, in labor markets. And if they're not well managed, and we only focus on those direct policies or that link to the energy sector, we risk to have many difficulties and definitely slow down the transition and risk inequitable outcomes. So several barriers and challenges, I think, are holding back also deployment in the regions. Plans and policies implemented at the national level, we do really need more regional coordination. The level of ambition is very different between the countries. Like many other regions in the world, decarbonization plans and targets tend to be limited to the power sector, overlooking very often other end use, transport and heating, cooling, etc. In terms of implementation, also in the power sector, several countries are only beginning to translate some of the targets to concrete policies and regulation. In the small-scale market segment, progress has been quite slow due, obviously, to subsidized fuel pricing and lack of low-cost financing as well in this segment of the market. And then there's several overarching challenges about carbon markets, modest electricity trade, several economies and livelihoods still relying, obviously, on fossil fuel. So in that sense, much more needs to be done to shift societies away from carbon-intensive socioeconomic development path. So my last slide is about this comprehensive policy framework. It looks daunting, but I think the main point is that beyond pure energy sector policy, again, as we name them deployment and enabling and cross-cutting, there really needs to be the set of structural and just transition that is required to manage those potential misalignment I spoke about, in particular in labor markets, in order to develop local supply chains, not necessarily at the national level, but at least at the subnational level. I think since the COVID, we have seen that people have started speaking without it being an insult about, localization of supply chains. Of course, provide education, training, etc., capacity building in terms of preparing the labor force for the future, and engage more actively communities and citizens. So basically, this is the holistic global policy framework that brings together the countries to commit to a just transition. And I'll speak later on when we go more into policies and finance a little more about this aspect, with a main message, which is that of international cooperation, but not in the usual way that we speak about it. That doesn't bring anything, but a real commitment to have funds basically flow from the global north to the global south in order to support the transition in those countries where the economies cannot necessarily afford the transition, or at least not at the scale and the pace that is required. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rabia, for providing this framework. The issue of integrating policies in the region may be crucial, perhaps to discuss in a while as well. Thanks. Let's move on to the next interventions, and then we can have comments. I suggest that the next intervention comes from Steve Griffiths, our other online attendant.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I appreciate that. I will share my screen. I do have a couple slides to show. So
just a moment. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Now you can. Great. We can see you and hear you.
Very good. Very good. Screen's clear. I think there seems to be a little settings box or something in this. Is it clear to you, the screen? It's good.
The screen.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll cover, given that we have just covered policy, I've covered both research and the policy part. Maybe I'll just go through both in one shot, because they do sort of link together, and I'll try to be a little bit quick in both sections because of that. I'll start off by the coordination of the energy research, and the two areas I'll cover is, one is what research should be done in what areas, and then secondly, a thought on how we can do the coordination in the most effective and efficient way. On the what side, the way the framework I typically look at, and I think Rabia has alluded to this in her previous slides, the way in which we want to go about trying to tackle the decarbonization challenge is to try to electrify with clean power as many end-use sectors as possible, achieve as much efficiency as possible, and then deal with the residual industries and sectors in which we have this, quote, hard to decarbonize challenge, where we have to deploy different technologies which are not directly amenable to electrification. So in the report, we saw that there were some areas for investment: zero carbon energy technologies, fossil fuel technology, CCUS, regional grid infrastructure, storage and smart grids, heating, cooling, and digitalization. I would say when you look at these priority areas from the diagram here, one thing that pops out as sort of the first consideration I have is that when you're trying to line up around where you want to put your research effort, system modeling is very important. And we saw from the report that it's not always easy to do modeling. And I'll talk about some of the data issues there. But nonetheless, if we're going to get into electricity grids and regional interconnectivity in that sense, having a modeling perspective in the research is quite important. When it comes to the technology R&D, I would say that the storage technologies, smart grids, and digital are extraordinarily important. I'll give an example of what we've been doing already in that regard at Khalifa University, because all EMN countries need to move in a direction of having decarbonized power supply that operates in a robust way and can integrate with end-use demand to help deal with the issues of intermittency, for instance, in solar energy. You need to have robust demand side management, and so smart grids, for instance, can help with that. Carbon capture utilization, storage. That is also important. There's debate about the relevance of that, but I believe in countries where you're having heavy industries or even power sectors where it's not all going to be renewable energy, having the carbon capture and utilization and storage as part of the framework is important. So these are areas I think are the most critical for us to discuss for the EMME countries to consider their R&D. I'll give an example of what we've already been doing in the collaborations. So as you can imagine, the Gulf countries, there's coordination already happening with Khalif University and KA in Saudi Arabia, since there's renewable ambitions, significant renewable ambitions in both countries, particularly around solar energy. We have developed for KA Care, using the capabilities we have at Khalif University, a renewable energy management system, and it's been deployed in Saudi Arabia and is now being used to help them manage the deployment of renewables, which we know is coming in large scale shortly. And the way it works is it brings in the prior considerations I talked about. We already had developed a remote sensing capability to do prediction over a reasonable level of lead time, renewable energy resources. We bring those predictions into a system where we can understand the optimal dispatch of renewables, of other grid connected assets for power generation, as well as energy storage. We balance the dispatch with the ability to potentially do load management on the demand side, so that there's the most optimal means of trying to figure out how to operate your grid intelligently. And so this is, you know, can imagine artificial intelligence, machine learning factors in, and that's going to be, I think, for many countries, part of the future paradigm. So we've done that. I'd like to see such an effort, not just between Gulf countries, but go across the entire region. I think that could be quite useful. As far as how we go about taking these ideas to an entire regional structure, it's a little challenging. And so the example that I would use is going to come up shortly here on mission innovation. I think that's a potentially relevant paradigm to consider. Before getting into that, though, I think the most important that we found in the report was that you have to have baseline information and data to understand what you're trying to achieve in your decarbonization. So I'd say that on R&D, to me, just getting the foundation of understandings, having the right priorities set up through modeling and seeing where there's potential interventions that can have the highest impact is critical. So as I'll talk about on the policy side of things, energy system modeling creates this interesting nexus to me of technology and policy. You need to drive your modeling into your techno-economic assessments toward value creation, and that value creation can be applied research, which is where fundamental research is most useful. Now, once you've got the foundations, scaling up could be interesting, pursuing a structure such as I was involved in back in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was put together, Mission Innovation launched. It now consists of 21 countries, I believe, is on that diagram there, plus the EU. And the idea is to develop breakthrough technologies in areas that all the countries involved see to be most important for achieving full decarbonization of all sectors. Structurally, the way it works, general framework, member countries are enlisted around a vision, so have a common vision. A secretariat's important. I don't think you can put together a large collaboration by having just individuals giving some voluntary time. You have to have a dedicated organization to run things. But that said, the members themselves, the member countries, would have more voluntary basis of researchers involved and leadership involved in the initiative. And then the topics I mentioned are of common interest. And I think mission innovation is great, but we have to tailor this to EMME because we know our concerns are different than the broader global set. The way it looks with mission innovation is, again, I'm saying not the areas we covered, is these different topics which were in the first round. They're now shifting a bit, getting into some of the more challenging issues like hydrogen and decarbonization of shipping is the new phase of mission innovation. But start off with things like carbon capture, off-grid access to electricity, smart grids, sustainable biofuels and the like. And so here you can see from the report that was developed in 2020 on what's been happening with mission innovation. There are member countries involved, so a number of countries were involved in each initiative, but there were co-leads that were designated from the members, and they basically took accountability for bringing together research that would add value, and they reported on that on a regular basis to a steering committee, which, as I said, had the member countries representing it. So I think as a discussion point, this could be an interesting way for us to think about R&D collaboration. Now, tying that in is just moving into the policy. Again, I think the technology and policy do have a natural unification. Policy, as Ravi has already alluded to in many ways, I always think about the defining way in which we think about it. So society is the focus, trying to achieve reliable, affordable energy that creates the opportunities for economic development without compromising the environment is fundamental. That said, when you get into policy around decarbonization, I'm always thinking about the ways in which you can help those societal goals be achieved. Climate change is a key factor here. We're going to talk about access, security, public health, and economic development fall underneath decarbonization, in my view, and I think in many other people's views as well. EMME, in the policy side, what I will say is the contextual heterogeneity. I mean, the countries are quite different in the way in which their economies are set up. That does create heterogeneity in policy, but I'd say now that climate change is becoming so much of an overarching thought, and even the UAE here, as people have seen, has committed net zero just recently. More and more countries are going to have to step up and make climate change a big part of their policy discussion. So I think that is going to be helpful to unifying what policy definitions are for energy, at least, in climate across the EMME region. In our report, we talked about a framework in which policy should be set up. We talked about visions to go into scenarios and strategies, and then finally roadmaps, and then the policies and standards themselves. I'd say if you kick this up to the regional level, the same notion applies, except in my view, and the sort of thought I put out there is there's probably parts of this process which could be regionalized versus parts that would need to be considered more from a sub-regional national level. It could be regional in some cases, but you know, given the heterogeneity of the way the countries are currently established, there may be some boundaries. And you know, I'd agree with what Rabia said, where the countries are already seeing different policies apply best to their context. You know, that shows that is really the case. So I'd say our general report framework is good, and then you bring some things to regional level and then find out where national has the most relevance. Then you get your toolbox, which I won't go through because we did it in the report, but it obviously offers up the ways in which different sectors can have policy considerations taken into account. One example of the regional level, I would never use the EU as an example because obviously that's a long history and they have a governance which is quite different from elsewhere in the world. I think it's trying to represent where we could go with sort of this little more loosely connected understanding of integration is ASEAN. I've done work on the Trans-ASEAN pipeline recently, just as part of some thinking about how we can connect gas across the GCC. And it's interesting because you know, the countries, they're maybe a little bit less heterogeneous than we have in EMME, but nonetheless, they are trying to coordinate themselves around energy. And so when you look at their strategies, they're looking at power, they're looking at the gas pipeline. For them, clean coal is their relevant technology to sort of transitional. Efficiency and renewables is standard everywhere. Policy planning coordination at the strategic level, modeling scenarios, and then nuclear, again, something we have that they have as well. I think it gives you a sense that when countries come together, although there are challenges and many of the ambitions that we'd like to see, for instance, the gas pipeline has not happened yet, a lot of bilateralism still happening. But nonetheless, there is that ambition, which is a good starting point when there's a looser connectivity. In the end, if you do get it right, regional security, energy security, and decarbonized future through power sector connectivity, low carbon gas supply, we wouldn't be hopefully as much as clean coal in the GCC, but other regionally interesting opportunities around clean natural gas, for instance, could be realized. Then human capital is always important, trying to create that base for the transition through coordination across borders. So I'd say there is an opportunity, and it's not unprecedented to see what we're talking about actually go forward and take at least a first step. The final slide I have, given where we are in the EMME, and we're probably not as connected as the ASEAN as far as the common interests, because there are, to me at least, a few distinct regions. So I'd say maybe as a proposal, we could consider the overall vision, as I mentioned. I think that's essential in the push toward trying to achieve the ultimate ambitions of the Paris Agreement in the most aggressive sense would pull us together for a common vision. Regionally, I think there's an opportunity to look at the foundations in a holistic sense, to do the modeling and the road mapping, to see where as a region we can come together to create shared value, and then start putting policy together. I fully agree. The carbon pricing Robbie mentioned, fossil fuel subsidy removal, education awareness. These are to me, underpinning, and they need to have broad collaboration in order to make them most effective. And so I don't see national boundaries around those types of policy coordinations. There may be more specific requirement around renewable energy and energy efficiency, what's most contextually relevant. Maybe it's group. So if we take the GCC, you know, how you go about decarbonizing power, what your energy efficiency framework looks like, maybe more coordinated than trying to do the whole EMME. And then there are the policies and frameworks that probably will cross, if not the whole region, at least one or two of these different boundaries. And so electricity interconnections, gas, including now hydrogen, to the extent we roll over natural gas pipelines or build new pipelines for hydrogen, CO2 as well. And then even shipping and aviation. You know, we start looking at crossing borders that are nearer rather than further, how we can coordinate those types of topics. So as a starting point, and for the discussion, I'd throw that out there, that there are ways in which we can progress the policy as well. And so that would be my thoughts, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the numerous ideas that you offered, both on items of research and governance of research, but also on these very specific concrete ideas about policy coordination, which can show a way forward that perhaps can be conveyed also to policymakers during the next 2 days of the conference this week. Thanks a lot for your contribution. We'll come back to it later. So let's then go on with Kamal Araj. You have a presentation? Yes, let's upload it here. This one? Yeah. So Ron, now you can make us presenters again. Okay. This.
Good afternoon. I was nice listening to Steve and to Rabia about their vision for this. I'll be very specific here in the discussion. I think we have developed a full menu in the report and the task force, but definitely we need a vision for the energy transition towards clean energy, essentially, that will involve all the following in the region: wind, solar, hydraulic, hydrosystem, nuclear, geothermal, and hydrogen. And definitely we need for the transportation would be essentially dense sector for mobility. That perhaps should be hydrogen, but definitely with the limitation we have in the region being, you know, rich in oil and gas, we cannot at all transition immediately out of that. So we would want to make sure that we have a smaller footprint for carbon for that. So we need a vision. I think both speakers have spoken about the vision for the net zero carbon, and I think it will revolve around these issues. So we definitely need to have a conversion to nuclear and renewable. I will describe why this is a must. Technological innovation, business models and regulation, and public acceptance will be very important for the region. So I think Saudi Arabia has been talking about circular economy, smart grid. We discussed, I think, important of transportation, demand side management, and we need to understand the areas that are limited in terms of electrification. We can actually have local territorial hubs for that. So it's very important to focus on hydrogen and also some of these fuels that will be able to develop further. So this is where I think nuclear can come in. So in nuclear, we have to read that part, but so in terms of the flexibility that nuclear can bring with the renewable energy, this is really an important activity. I know till storage, doubt that storage will come within the next 20 years. The urgency is really to do this within the next 10 years. I think this is the time gap that we need. Definitely for the region should really pledge and a longer time horizon, but that cannot be done as individual countries. It has to be done as a regional bloc in the negotiation of the Paris Agreement. So this will be the only hope for GCC countries to really have a say, because GCC countries already have exceeded their carbon quota. Consider carbon quota is designed per capita. So only as a regional they can make a claim. So the region actually is below its quota system. But looking at individual countries, per capita in the current emissions, they probably exceed the average. But overall, that's not the way to look at it. So we need to look at it from the pre-industrial revolution till the present, till 2100 anyway. And that's why the region could make a claim that we need more time to transition to low carbon. But nuclear can actually enable all of the hydrogen production. We have essentially nuclear high temperature reactor can give us 600 degrees to 900 degrees that we can make a very competitive hydrogen that renewable cannot do. And I think in terms of the flexibility with renewable, so this is very important to be able to do these things. So, but effectively, nuclear energy has to be integrated over the economy. Here I have a high temperature reactor that can give us what we need for that. And the focus here will be on small modular reactor. Because these things are talking about the range of 100 to 200 megawatt electric, can integrate very well with the renewable energy and provide flexibility that's lacking, so that we could have a higher penetration of renewable. Remember that in our report, we're talking about on the terms of the primary energy, it's only 1.4% is the penetration of renewable. There is no way in any kind of market penetration that this is going to reach the numbers that we have discussed. It's impossible tasks. We need nuclear and we need renewable and hydrogen. We need to use this synthetic fuel, convert that through to nuclear. And hydrogen production, I think we're quite familiar with this. With nuclear reactor that we are producing, we can be able to reduce, provide that kind of temperature, and we will have essentially green hydrogen. Should that we will have some gray hydrogen at the very beginning, converting the assets from oil and gas, which we're not going to abandon in the region, but eventually we need to move to green hydrogen. And I think nuclear could enable that. And essentially, we should move up eventually from oil to nuclear refinery. So nuclear can actually provide all the synthetic molecules that we need for mobility. That's very difficult to do with simple hydrogen. And I think this kind of vision, I think the region could adopt. And I think we have the capability to do that. We have the financing, and not just also the internal financing from the OPEC countries, but also external financing under the Paris Agreement and Kyoto Protocol. We need to actually talk about financing for this. So this region, then the region could actually participate effectively in this kind of vision, but can't be done without having a regional approach. This is going to be done country by country, Saudi Arabia by itself, but definitely the OPEC countries, GCC countries, have an ethical obligation to finance this part. And this is just to show you the difference between traditional and the nuclear financing. So the nuclear, hydrogen, and biomass, and the biomass is available. We can do that. That's not going to affect the food production. That you can actually, this is Charles Prosper, this diagram. So you'll have water, hydrogen, and hydrocarbons that you can use. And this is a clean source of fuel. So essentially, we need innovation, be able to have nuclear and renewable to converge to net zero in the future. And I think this is this vision that we described can be implemented in the region over time. So specifically, as I think both speakers have discussed, we should share human resources, research facilities, and education and training facilities. There is no point in duplicating these in the region as a whole. Sharing nuclear regulator and licensing technical support organization is a must. So we don't need to have regulators in every country. It's very expensive, time consuming. We need to have one single nuclear regulator. I'm talking about this regulation can be done separately, but it's important to have one regional TSO. The public awareness we discussed is very important to coordinate public awareness. A lot of countries like the Emirates is very advanced in actually coordinating their public campaign with the public, and that can be learned, can be brought into the other regions. Also, we should be sharing first-of-a-kind demonstration of these technologies, a nuclear refinery or desalination or small reactors. You know, I mean, this could be done. It's very, very expensive for any country like Jordan, for example, to do that. But we have the human resources and the technology know-how, and bring in money from Saudi Arabia or the Emirates, or from this financing mechanism that we hear about but we never see. And it's very important to even for nuclear, to standardize the fleet of nuclear power plants. Frankly, we should limit maybe one or two types only. Doesn't make sense to have each one different variety, because if you do that, then you can have a lot of cost saving in the maintenance, refueling, and waste management. Waste management, I think we need to have one single repository in the region, not each of the country. I know under EU, you know, every country should have its own repository. It's very expensive. This is 1 billion or 2 billion range. One repository is sufficient to store all the nuclear waste from these countries and make public acceptable actually for that. In the joint nuclear power development, ownership, and financing to share cost of this. And this is very important. What we have a connected grid, and it doesn't make sense where to build the reactor. If you build the reactor where it's easier to actually operate and to finance and access to water, which is actually very lacking. And I think the grid introduction, I think both spoke about that. That could also help us to reduce the spinning reserves and can be able to put a larger size reactor in the future, not just small reactor. Also, the nuclear fuel site facilities, fabrication, enrichment, the processing, then the back end and the repository. This is something the region could decide, but this is required policy, and it has to be decided. Just for an example, I show you two. So we have other example in the region. The Jordan Research Teaching and Training Reactor is available in Jordan, here in Just University. This reactor is open for the whole region. We invite all our colleagues to, rather than build their own reactor for training and research, to come utilize this. Sesame is also a regional hub. Cyprus is a member, Israel is a member, Palestine is a member, Jordan, Egypt. So hopefully we will have the rest of the people from NRE to participate. This does advanced research in all the fields and development for that. It's very important. We also can do some work for climate change in Sesame. So concluding remarks, without nuclear, the region will fail to meet its obligation under the Paris Agreement. I'm very sure that cannot be done by renewable batteries. So the nuclear energy expands the supply option for present and future generation, and is consistent with the definition of sustainable development and green growth. I know in the EU taxonomy, sustainable development, we've been trying to exclude nuclear, but in EMME region, we should define it differently. I think nuclear is sustainable under all definitions, even under the originally was defined as sustainable development by Bratland, but still very important to focus on. And I think nuclear science and technology provide many aspects for the water, energy, food nexus for regional collaboration, and does provide the region with an important medium to long-term alternative for desalination and processing. So policy fragmentation, this is the problem that we have. There is a number of organizations, initiatives, task force in the region with redundant and similar agenda, leading to confusion for the policy level. Example, ESQA, ARENA, Arab Center for Climate Change Policies, and RECAR. This is for the world. Really, I think we have so many of these initiatives. If you come up, all of them publish their own findings and reports, they will confuse the hell of any policymaker. We need to have one, and I find the EMME region is a very substantial contribution, and this we can blend in all of these useful findings, but we cannot give you disparate findings from different groups. So this will be confusing and very inconsistent. So I think nuclear energy is really for the future generation, shown here the old time, my daughter a long time ago. So it's really there. This clean and green energy is for the future generation, and we should really work on it presently. Cannot wait. And I think we really have 10 years time window before we really need to transition as described. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamal, for these clear messages. And there are also some policy issues to discuss, not only about the technology, but also about the regional cooperation. Okay, let's move to Dr. Charles Elinas. You don't have a presentation, so what should we show, Ron, during the time? No, we should just show Mr. Elinas speaking. Shall we ask him to come here? He's here? Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, so we can look at. No. You will tell us when we are ready. Okay.
Thank you. Just on nuclear, I mean, we are presenting a report in Brussels in 2 weeks. I'm not going to say key details, but in the report I included a small section on nuclear. But my German colleagues were very reticent. Very reticent about nuclear. Anyway, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Theo and Professor Papanikolas for organizing this workshop. For me, the Cyprus Institute is a beacon of light regarding climate change here in Cyprus, which receives a lot of words, but little in action, in terms of action. We have a colleague here, Andreas Poulikas, who perhaps he won't say it himself, but he's highly frustrated about some of the aspects of how our politicians handle climate change here in Cyprus. First, my background is in the oil and gas sector. Having said that, much of my recent work revolves around energy issues in their totality. I write frequently articles in the Cypriot press advocating for the faster implementation of renewables and clean energy at scale. And this background allows me to look at the problem from another angle and take perhaps a contrarian view than perhaps some of my fellow panelists would. You advised me of the details of the workshop only last week, so please bear with me if my presentation is in some respects unstructured. Undoubtedly, the future of energy is one way: clean energy, renewables, and net zero emissions by 2050. But even though more or less everybody agrees, including most of the oil and gas sector, that this is the end target, there is a small matter of how and by when. My intervention is mostly on the question of how do we get there? The unfolding energy crisis in Europe, but also in the rest of the world, shows that in the short to medium term, renewables alone cannot provide the energy the world needs. The cold winter in Europe led to high consumption of gas, It was followed by a hot summer with unusually low wind speeds, requiring more gas to make up the difference. Storages depleted, and filling them up is a challenge due to the unplanned shutdowns, plant maintenance, and rapidly increasing energy demand as a result of the post-pandemic recovery. And on top of that, we have the cost of emission allowances, which is close to 2.5 times this year when it was the level it was last year, increasing gas and electricity prices further, adding to the problem. You may say that that is a good thing because high emission costs will drive fossil fuels out. Well, first, there is the impact on consumers who are not prepared to just pay the additional costs. Remember the yellow vests in France, and through them on politicians and governments. And we see the backlash already developing in Europe. Then there is also the problem of intermittency, as shown in Europe this summer. Even though these issues eventually will be resolved, they are problematic now and will continue being problematic until the required technological solutions become available at scale. While intermittency remains a problem, it is critical to make sure that sufficient backup energy remains available until renewables are able to pick up the load. This may include nuclear. This may also may well last well into the next decade before we get there, before intermittency ceases becoming a problem, being a problem. During that period, oil and gas will be essential, likely in declining quantities, but nevertheless, the capacity to provide these as needed must be available. Starving the oil and gas sector from investment and forcing change too soon will prove unworkable, as is happening now. Investments in the upstream oil and gas sector dropped by about 70% in the period 2014 to 2021. As a result, now that rapidly increasing volumes of natural gas and barrels of oil are needed as the global economy recovers from the pandemic, they are not immediately available. The result is an energy crisis, huge volatility, exorbitantly high prices, and panic in Europe. And this will happen again and again and again. It happened in the past. And while this situation lasts, security of uninterrupted energy supplies, reliability and affordability will be issues that will persist and with huge economic and social implications. It is no good saying that renewables are becoming cheaper than fossil fuels if these issues remain. If reliability, affordability, and uninterrupted energy supplies are not guaranteed. As long as there is an intermittency problem, renewables will need to be backed up, no matter how cheap they are, preferably by natural gas, rather than coal, as is happening now in China and in India. Because, as you know, China and India are now turning heavily back to coal. And even Germany is bringing back its coal power generation plants because there's no other way. Indeed, transition is likely to be a costly process. We all hope that cheaper renewables will bring cheaper electricity. I think it's a fallacy while intermittency is a problem. Until we get rid of intermittency, that is not going to happen. If the less well-off are not shielded, there would be a backlash that could even derail transition. There is a danger of this happening now in Europe, and COP26 may even be affected. As you know, China and the United States are not seeing eye to eye anymore. One of the reasons is because China is not going to be just following instructions, cutting down on coal and oil and gas if they are not ready with renewables. And we see it definitely happen now in Europe. An additional problem experienced right now is that starving the oil and gas sector from investment will generate increasing uncertainties about the future of the sector. And that brings in price volatility and with all its consequences. Moody's estimates that over the next few years, the sector will need over 500 billion new investments just to be able to provide the quantities of oil and gas that will still be needed. And right now, for example, this year, the oil companies are investing just over 100 billion in the oil and gas, not enough to develop new sources of oil and gas, just to maintain some of what they have. How to get to the desired end result will certainly be still unclear. Much depends on technology and processes still to be developed. Even the International Energy Agency says so. This workshop and the conference that follows is fully dedicated to that. And part of Professor Arash's presentation is how do we get there? About the technology needed for the end result. There is no longer a need to convince anybody, including the oil and gas sector, that transition to clean energy is paramount. But we owe it to the world to ensure that we get there in an orderly manner, even more so in EMME, the East Med and Middle East, where there is considerable skepticism and that an energy transition is not seen as today's problem, but something too far away to worry about, lost in an uncertain future, often seen as tomorrow's problem. People want to know that they will get the energy they need uninterruptedly, reliably and affordably today and tomorrow. And they don't look at what happens by 2050. People mostly accept that emissions and climate change must be dealt with, but the majority, especially low-income people, expect it to happen with no additional cost to them. They are not prepared to pay for it or change their lifestyles, even more so in Asia and here in this region. Remember, as I said before, the yellow vest in France, and look at what is happening in Europe now. We should be under no illusion. Energy transition comes at a price, and not everybody will be able to afford that. There is an increasing risk that if the current energy crisis lasts too long, it may derail COP26 and the European Commission's ambitious clean energy program embodied in the Green Deal and the for 55 proposals. There are already calls by almost the majority of countries within the EU to abandon expanding ETS to include transport and heating. Because they've seen the result, they're worried. Even though, if anything, clean energy ambition will increase, we still have to deal with the realities of the present. So in the EMME region, we must map the road to net zero by 2050, but especially what needs to be done getting there, ensuring that energy security through continuous and uninterrupted energy supplies and affordable energy for all. Energy security is the role of the state. It needs to set up the necessary policies and mechanisms to ensure that research must address these issues, provide answers, and bridge the yawning gap of how we get there without drama, and ensuring security of energy supplies at every stage of the process to get to 2050 or whatever we define the end result. In the following, I'm suggesting areas that, in addition to the above, should be included in the region energy research program. First, how best to utilize East Med gas reserves to provide backup to renewables during the energy transition. This includes abandoning unrealizable plans to export these resources to global markets. It isn't going to happen. Accept it and look at how we can use it locally. As long as we keep aspiring to these riches that will come out of selling gas to the global markets, we're kidding ourselves. We're missing the boat eventually. Demonstrate to regional governments and Europe the futility of pursuing gas exports and the impact this can have in removing a source of conflict in the region. As amply demonstrated during the current energy crisis, ensuring security of energy supplies during transition is of paramount importance. In Europe, Securing the quantities of natural gas envisaged to be needed in winter has sent prices to unbelievable highs. In China, the government has instructed its energy companies to get the gas needed and even coal at any cost. In this region has ample resources of natural gas. Access to these in a cooperative and coordinated manner and at affordable prices can ensure security of energy supplies throughout the transition period. Low-cost renewables and natural gas provide the region with the potential to produce cheap, zero-carbon energy for export, either as electricity or in the form of fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia. Europe provides vast market opportunities for such products. Expansion and modernization of electrical grids to accept more renewable power is essential. Without it, we're not going to go very far. Renewable electricity should be used for clean desalination to mitigate water shortages caused by climate change. Right now, we're busy burning fossil fuels to desalinate, an expensive process, unnecessarily. And there, intermittency is not necessarily a problem because we don't need to be generating the electricity required on a continuous basis. Interconnections among the countries of the region, but also with Europe, can enhance flexibility and ensure grid stability, thus facilitating the wider deployment of renewables. But the region is a hotbed of enmities and rivalries going back into history that, for example, resurfaced during the East Med maritime disputes last year. It's also a region with a long history of unstable governments and failed states, as evidenced by Lebanon right now. So how secure is it for one country in the region to be dependent on another for its energy? Energy geopolitics is an important factor in the region, and it needs to be addressed. It's not good just saying cooperate. No, these are just words. How do you do it if we don't trust each other? Growing dependence on electricity can have its own drawbacks. Electricity grids and systems, including interconnectors, can become targets of cyber attacks. The issue to be dealt with. We've seen this happening in the United States at great cost. Regional energy geopolitics and interactions between the regional countries and as they transit into clean energy should be monitored as part of a program to promote regional cooperation. Two new phenomena that have surfaced post-pandemic are supply chain shortages and warnings by the IEA and others about the potential scarcity of minerals and materials required to build new clean energy technologies, potentially impacting costs and challenging energy security. How could these affect energy transition in the region? This needs to be understood and allowed for in future plans. A strong partnership between the region and Europe can benefit both. It should involve transfer of technology and investments from Europe to the region, and the region could also benefit from Europe's vast knowledge base and know-how, ready-made clean energy policies and regulations that can be tailored to the needs of the region. And the region has an entry into Europe through Cyprus and Greece. Eventually, the region should be able to export green electricity, hydrogen, and ammonia to Europe. We must tackle how to get there, this end result, in an orderly manner. If we do not, we will be in danger of drifting from crisis to crisis as energy volatility increases until intermittency ceases to be a problem. And as I said, this will take time. I am sure that many of these suggestions are already under investigation, but hope that those that relate to the period of transition provide the constructive. I have some policy ideas for later.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charles. I suppose the online people can hear us. Thank you very much for your messages. I got a message from Rabia from her colleagues that she had connection problems, but she may reconnect in a while. Let me also tell you, I mean, tell us, especially the people who are attending online, that we have in-person attendance from some prominent energy professionals in Cyprus. We have with us Dr. Andreas Poulikas, who is the chairman of the Energy Regulatory Authority. We have Mr. Savas Vlachos, who is the director of the Cyprus Energy Agency, which is essentially an NGO working on energy issues. And also Dr. Konstantinos Varnava, who is an assistant manager at the Electricity Authority of Cyprus. And also George Partasidis, who is working at the Office of the Director General of the Energy Ministry. And of course, we thank them again for being with us. Most of the speakers, because that's how it turned out after all, focused on policy. Although all of them also focused a little bit on research priorities as well. Because Steve will be available with us for another 15 minutes, I would like to ask him something, and then perhaps we could give the floor to the audience before giving the floor to the panelists again. Firstly, what do you think about this idea of Kamal that the Gulf countries would be served if they could negotiate as a bloc with the whole region, because their per capita emissions are already very high and they may be in a somewhat more difficult position during global negotiations? What your take would be being located in the Emirates? Secondly, I would like to ask you who is supporting or funding this mission innovation, which, as you mentioned, could be a good model, not to copy, but to get ideas from in order to coordinate research in the region. And the third one would be what the approach to green fuels is in the Emirates and in the Gulf countries as regards research. Are they investing heavily on research on green, or at least non-fossil or gray hydrogen and other fuels? And of course, you can also comment on whatever you have heard, because as I said, you have to leave in a while.
Sure. I'll take the last question first, then you'll have to remind me what the first question was. So I'll start with the fuels. So I think, globally right now, hydrogen has become the topic of the day. And in the Gulf countries, you can imagine, since there's such a strong historical dependence on production of oil and gas, moving into hydrogen makes a natural sense because it's an extension of what can be done to make hydrocarbons cleaner. So in the Saudi Arabia and Oman, in the UAE in particular, you're seeing lots of initiatives now to start producing both blue and green hydrogen. So with the green hydrogen, it makes sense for us. We have great natural resources for solar energy, a little less so wind. So trying to build up the capability to produce through electrolysis hydrogen as exportable or for use in industries which currently need to have decarbonized forms of hydrogen to make their products. Iron and steel is one example. Ammonia is a good example. Refineries are an example. This is all the types of things that we're looking at with green hydrogen and blue as well, because we have great natural resources in gas. And so trying to develop natural gas in a cleaner way has become a very big part of what the national oil companies are looking at. Saudi Aramco in Saudi Arabia, ADNOC in the UAE, finding the ways to leverage the carbon capture, utilization, and now increasingly storage capabilities and knowledge built up through the oil and gas sector. Very, very big ideas. I think for the context of this discussion, the way collaboration can happen with these ambitions is understanding where these countries, such as the GCC countries, which are not going to utilize all the hydrogen they can produce locally, where could they be optimal suppliers for countries which maybe don't have the same resource level, that will need to be partners either in direct use or as being conduits potentially for pipeline transmission of gas to other places. So to me, that's an interesting opportunity, is how you make utilization of hydrogen when trying to take it across borders I've written a paper very recently, a rather long paper on hydrogen, looking at that from a socio-technical perspective. And to be quite honest, the biggest challenge with hydrogen today is how you're going to get it to an end-use customer, because we can produce it as cheaply as we like, but if you can't find ways to lower the costs of shipping, if you have to go overseas across continent and pipelines aren't available, that's tough. That's a very tough challenge. That's why most of the Gulf countries are now trying to make ammonia, because they know that's a product that's available, that they're already making. And if you're not going to have to bring ammonia back or crack it back to hydrogen, it's fairly inexpensive to get that overseas. But that's not the case if you have to get back hydrogen for its end use. So I think that we're trying to find the ways in which we can exploit these natural resources to create low carbon fuels, and hydrogen is the topic of the day. Aviation, I see that going in the same way. If we look at aviation and maritime, eventually hydrogen will be needed to create the long-term fuel supply. Electric fuels was mentioned. I believe that's the case. Of course, nuclear can play a role in that. In the UAE, we have nuclear, and I'm deeply involved in that area as well. It's not just oil and gas, but trying to use hydrogen for the fuels for shipping, aviation, could be ammonia, could be methanol, could be electric fuels, many different ways. I think that's also an opportunity. So the low carbon fuels area is a very, very big part of what we're doing in the Gulf countries. And I'd really enjoy working with other countries and other organizations that would like to look at how hydrogen and low carbon fuels can be most beneficially developed. On mission innovation, I was involved early on. So when the UAE joined in 2015, I was in the inception of that. The challenge with mission innovation funding is there's no big pot of money for joint R&D. The way it's set up, besides the secretariat, obviously, where you have to pay the salaries of the people, what have you, through a central body, the mainstay of the funding, the research, is organized around finding opportunities which come through the partner countries. EU has always been great. The European countries typically have good levels of research funding for collaboration, so that's been something to tap into. Other countries may come forward with an opportunity and initiative in their particular domain. If it's a carbon capture, if there's a country that would like to work with others, and maybe it'd be bilateral funding that would come in, maybe it'd be multilateral funding that would come in. That's part of the game on these kind of initiatives, where you're not going to get one stakeholder putting in the entire bankroll to the collaboration. The members that sign up need to be able to bring also opportunities for funding, which to me makes natural sense, because in the areas that we're looking at, we're taking, say, the EMME countries, and we know we have to go to, let's take the first step, low carbon power. If it's going to be smart grids, if it's going to be storage, it's relevant to the context. I think a number of countries that need this research and development to further the types of technologies which need to be deployed, I think they'd be very engaged in putting in some funding to a common pool and then finding the best research that could benefit a multiple number of countries. And that's how Mission Innovation did many of its research activities when they were collaborative. On the first point, I got to get one question from you. When it comes to the carbon intensity, what was the exact question? I know that we are intense carbon producers in the Gulf, at least per capita. So what was the exact question? How we can pass that load on to our partners? What was the question?
Kamal's idea was that since the Gulf countries are very carbon intensive, and they can only be on the defensive when talking about decarbonization targets in global agreements, in global negotiations, it serves them better if they could somehow form a regional coalition with the other countries of our region, so that overall the carbon intensity of the region is lower, and perhaps they feel less pressure to have binding or NDCs or other binding commitments that would require very steep greenhouse gas emission reductions from these Gulf countries.
No, I think, okay, that's a very good point. Certainly, I think having a regional perspective so that the countries that are best situated to be able to decarbonize to a greater extent can bear that part of the load for the regional ambition to become low carbon. That does make sense. But I don't think we necessarily want to let the burden of the countries in the Gulf, for instance, fall fully onto others. The UAE, if those are not aware, just announced it'll be net zero by 2050. Now, that's net zero, as which we typically would talk about our own internal emissions, not the exported emissions from all the oil and gas that maybe goes overseas, particularly oil. But nonetheless, within the economy, the ambition is to try to bring, at least in the power sector locally, the transportation sector, industrial sector, bring the emissions down. And that I think is an ambition that all countries need to sign up to. So the regional perspective makes sense, and I think that's a good way to go about it. The Gulf countries then could support some of the countries which are able to go more quickly into decarbonization across all sectors. But I don't think it's necessarily the case that we want that to be the long-term strategic approach, is to try to move the ambition away from the countries which are more carbon intensive. Maybe give them more time. We can't have economies that go complete 180 and then be able to reverse the carbon intensive, industrial intensive economic structure too quick. But I do think at least there should be an ambition and a roadmap to making that transition, because in the end, by 2050 and beyond, I don't think any country in the world is going to be able to say it's doing its fair share by having a very carbon intensive economy, even if it's just per capita carbon intensity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Would anyone like to ask or comment on anything that Steve presented before? Because we will have him for another 5 minutes. I liked very much the concrete idea about the steering committee and the secretariat for the research coordination. I mean, insisting on the research aspects. Although you, do you think also in the issue of regional cooperation, you showed roughly 3 sub-regions of the region where one could think about policy coordination. How realistic would you find this?
Well, if you take it from the perspective of where, for instance, if we're going to go about decarbonization and look at policies, where would carbon capture, utilization, and storage make the most sense to try and move to decarbonization quickly versus going fully into renewables, right? And so making your renewable energy or renewable electricity targets, very robust and try to make electrification, almost complete. The GCC countries, to me, would be a natural location where you start to move more into policies which favor things like carbon capture, utilization, storage, and trying to make that robust. The renewables in countries which are much less, obviously, if they're not producing oil and gas, if they're not natural resource producers, if there's an opportunity for them to go into electrification because they're not very much into heavy industry, I'd say then the policy set will be more naturally coordinated amongst those sets of countries. I put my boundaries not just on the context of the energy system, but also the financial and also sort of cultural or overarching strategic environment, so that any country which is within the EU perspective obviously has a let's say almost a head start on trying to put policy coordination together, because the EU's done a great job in that already. Countries which don't have that policy head start and ours, we heard in the last discussion and the last point, fragile states, very different context. So they're going to have to look at policies and what they can do in their own way. And coordination, to me, would be beneficial, because you could start to find out where those countries have commonalities. They could benefit from dialogues amongst each other. And then again, not necessarily just in the resources, but also in the economic status. The Gulf countries, with the wealth they have and their ability to invest in technology, looking at policies which require more degrees of investment, I think those countries would be well suited to do that. I think coordination is always difficult, without a doubt. Trying to get people to sit down and say that one country's way of doing things and another country's way of doing things can be aligned. It's tough. So I've been in the GCC been here now over a decade, and the GCC is its own area. It doesn't cooperate as much as it should or could. That's why I'm still writing papers with my colleagues about why we should have natural gas integration. Never happened, although we have great resources and we're all next to each other. So I know the challenges, and I just say that's why I would recommend finding some divisions which make more logical contextual sense, rather than trying to roll it out across an entirely heterogeneous region like EMME.
Okay, thank you. A colleague, yes, but you need to bring it close to you, or Ron, Steve with us for another. Okay, we have two questions, one from Kamal and one from our colleague Nestor.
It's very difficult to hear you, Steve. I think the connection was not, but I didn't hear you. I mean, you are sitting in a country that already is building 4 reactors amounting to 5.6 gigawatt electric. And you have not mentioned the role of nuclear into this transition. I mean, I'm afraid that I missed if you mentioned about the role of nuclear. I mean, nuclear is a must part of the strategy for decarbonization, but I didn't hear you mention it at all. Do you understand?
Well,
do you understand? I mean, you just
I
build
mentioned.
the reactors for sure.
Yeah, nuclear is interesting. So nuclear is the UAE. We do have, as Kamal said, 5.6 gigawatts of nuclear coming online. I actually chair the board of the nuclear research, the Emirates Nuclear Technology Research Center, which is dedicated toward creating a safe and environmentally sustainable nuclear operation. So I'm very much involved in where nuclear is going. I think that does make sense. It's a very, how do I say it? It's a divisive topic. There are some that are adamantly against nuclear. There are some that are very for it. I'd say when I talk about context, nuclear is a technology which will be very context dependent. In the Gulf states, yes, we're doing it. We're looking at it. It's part of the overarching framework for the way we want to decarbonize. In Asia, it's definitely happening. In Europe, not so much. So, you know, that's fine. That's, again, I mentioned context many times. In that context, that would not be one of the regions in which you'd say nuclear is going to make a big dent. But here, you know, we're not in the UAE. We're not going to go beyond 5.6 gigawatts. I mean, that's not in the overarching framework. But the amount of nuclear that we have online and operating it safely is part of our view. And I think collaborating with countries which are also doing nuclear energy as part of their overarching decarbonization framework, it's maybe not so much for us about trying to build new technologies for nuclear, but making sure what we do is operate in the most robust way, the safest way. If we can leverage nuclear for making low carbon fuels like hydrogen through electrolysis, that's great. So I think there's many ways in which nuclear can be exploited, and we should pursue that in the countries where nuclear is you know, so to speak, politically and socially acceptable.
Okay, we have also a question from our colleague at the Cyprus Institute, Nestor Phylaktos.
Hi, Steve. Thanks very much for the work that you have done for the initiative. I have a kind of a technical question as well. You have talked about the role of carbon capture and storage and utilization, and that seems to be central to the plans for the region, given the history that they have with extracting and using fossil fuels. So what happens if, well, at the moment it's in quite an experimental stage and a small stage globally. So what if the rollout of technology that is projected to happen in the region doesn't pan out the way that the region would have liked, and it's either too expensive or too impractical? What is the plan B for the region? Is it nuclear? Is it all hydrogen? What are they going to do with all the fossil fuel resources? Thank you.
Well, yeah, we hope there won't be stranded assets. I mean, I think in particular, if you break down the fossil fuels, I mean, oil and gas to me are very different. Oil is a commodity where pumping out as much as possible in the near term to monetize it to the extent possible is a good idea, because we can't rely on plastics and petrochemicals to save us, because we know even those potential future markets may not be there because there's movements to try and create more sustainability on waste. So oil is its own, and I don't know, you know, with oil, I've been asked many times what else to do with it. That's an ongoing issue. Now, gas, I think the opportunity there is to try to leverage as much as possible the understanding of how we can utilize any amounts of CO2, if we're going to say go to blue hydrogen, or if we're going to go to other forms of generation where CO2 is produced, besides the storage, which is, you know, it's fine if you want to geologically store something, but how to use it to the best extent. I mean, we're doing lots of research now about concretes or the cements and how CO2 can be incorporated, any types of electric fuels. I always say, you know, it's great if we can bring some CO2 in a circular carbon economy and use that for aviation, for instance, to the extent possible. I mean, obviously we can't monetize all natural gas by trying to utilize that in a CO2 producing way and then create fuel for aviation, but it's needed if you're going to go to electric fuels. There will be a source of CO2 to some extent. Even shipping fuels, same idea, to trying to create those higher value higher value fuels. So the utilization of CO2, I mean, there's lots of work going on globally. And I'd say, to me, that's more important than just having a view of geologic storage. Although Saudi Arabia in particular has been very vocal that they've been able to understand the extent of the storage opportunity there, and they want to import CO2 potentially from countries which are producing it because they think they can store it in the gigaton levels. I mean, it's just a massive amount of storage they think they've got. So that's good, but you're right. I mean, it's not really proven, and so we need to be trying to push the R&D toward utilization besides either EOR or direct storage.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. I hope you can stay longer, but if not,
I'll have to go, but thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a great discussion, and it was nice to see you, and I wish you a great conference. Thank you.
it does all. Okay, okay. Does anyone from the audience comment or ask anything to Charles or Kamal? Because Rabia has traditionally had connection problems throughout our workshops. I hope she can make it, but until then, we have two panelists here. Would someone want to ask something related to their interventions? Yes, Constantina. Just a moment, it's you need to get sort of a microphone.
Well, perhaps it's less of a question, more of a comment, but I'll start from what Dr. Elinas has said about, and he said it twice, if I'm not mistaken, if we cannot get rid of intermittency, we cannot go forward. And with the decarbonization. So to get rid of determinacy, we need storage, and we need storage in different time scales, right?
Long-term storage.
You need seasonal storage, and this seasonal storage, as far as I know, it doesn't exist. Maybe Norway has some very large water reservoirs to for seasonal storage, but even those this year they have dried out. They cannot supply all the energy they want to the rest of Europe. And we also need storage in the very short term for frequency control, and in the medium term for load shifting within the day. So the time scale parameter is something that is usually ignored. People, when they talk about storage, they think about batteries, but those are not enough. So hydrogen is the solution. That's the way that I see it. Is the technology here already? Is it economic? Can we hope that by 2050 we will have the cheap storage for seasonal storage of electricity? And what have we learned? What have we learned from the recent energy crisis in Europe? We've learned that renewables are not enough to solve the problem. We still have long ways to go. Thank you.
Can I comment briefly on hydrogen? There was a report produced by the annual report produced by the EMME about a couple of weeks ago, in which they looked at hydrogen in great detail. Their conclusion is that to get hydrogen at the scale required and at competitive prices against other fuels, it's not going to happen in time for 2050. They believe that the contribution of hydrogen to global energy by 2050 at best will be 5%. It's not enough on its own. So hydrogen, yes, there's a lot of hope. Maybe nuclear can come in and provide hydrogen cheaply, but it has to be cheap, not just producing it. It has to be competitive. And certainly the DNB report, and I pay a lot of attention to what DNB says, because it's a very capable organization, quite independent, it's not encouraging.
Yeah, I think the nuclear can provide, I think, hydrogen up to $2 per kilogram.
$2 is too expensive.
It's not expensive, $2.
Well, have to go down to $1.
Can it be stored long term? Can it produce hydrogen in the spring and consume it next week?
Well, hydrogen, I mean, you can store it as ammonia or some other thing, perhaps. But still, I think in terms of the intermittency of renewable, that can be solved by the kind of dispatchable sources like nuclear, in which, like small modular reactors, they can load follow, and they can do this frequency adjustments in the short term and in the longer term. Because there is no sources for hydro in the Middle East for storage. I think also thermal storage is a potential. Using red bricks or other things, this is potential. So electricity storage and thermal storage. And I think nuclear can provide that. But we're not talking about the current reactors types. The temperature, for these current light water reactors, only 300 centigrades. We're talking about high temperature reactors going up to 900 centigrade. That can produce hydrogen at much lower cost.
I would like to ask something that is not that much related to power generation, but to end users. And having in mind also the interests of the national authorities that are focused more than what we have discussed now on consumers, and also on activities such as those of the Cyprus Energy Agency and of course many similar organizations around the world focusing on issues like energy poverty, new models for decentralized energy generation, energy production and use, and also energy communities. Do you think that these, we focus too much on the big technologies, and we need to focus also on understanding the behaviors of different consumers because they may not have been explored substantially or sufficiently in the region? Do you think that how serious could energy poverty be? You have already touched upon this, of course, but could all these considerations focusing on end users help us create an agenda for research and perhaps also provide policy recommendations for these kinds of for these aspects of the energy transition? I don't know if George or Savas want to add on this, and perhaps then.
But just to understand, you're talking about these communities not connected to the grid?
No. Energy communities is a relatively new term, at least in Europe, that has to do with decentralized energy generation, decentralized and digital. Yes, they could be connected to the grid. Yes, they could be virtual communities as well. They could be virtual communities, not necessarily an isolated place which forms a community. Yes. They could benefit from digitalization and liberalization of the electricity market. Yes, Sama.
Yeah, indeed, Theodoros, it was something that I wanted to comment for consideration. Of course, the discussion here is about the technologies and the different fuel types and how to meet the increasing demand of electricity. But this is not the way forward. We should consider how to decrease the demand with not only energy efficiency, but of course with awareness and radical changes on the way of living at the personal level, in individual consumer or household, and also at business level. So then if we consider the possibilities of decreasing dramatically the energy needs, then might the technologies of today, the renewable energy sources with the storage capabilities that we do know, maybe it's feasible to be decarbonized quite soon. So of course, we need policies, we need incentives, we need promotion of to change energy behavior, to change the way of living. And it's not only energy, it's also the food we eat, the transportation, the habits, a lot of things. In order to meet the climate change goals that we said that we need to meet. This is my comment, and of course we need policies.
But do you think we can really substantially decrease energy consumption?
We should, because there is no other way. We should. So, and my complaint from the politicians and from the scientists is that so far we didn't inform the society that there is a radical change to come, mainly with changes in the price, in the energy prices. But we should change in order to avoid becoming energy poor, becoming energy dependent. So otherwise, I don't see any other way to meet 2030 goals or 2050, at least for the European Union. Technology is important, solutions are there, new technologies will come, but it's not only decarbonize like saving the CO2. We need all the technology to be introduced to be protecting the environment. So this is like, if I'm not aware the nuclear power production and the details of that, maybe the society is not ready for solution. Maybe the environment is not ready for the case of a disaster. So it's like a question mark without being an expert on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think there is, I mean, your question about consumer behavior, I think it's a massive research topic that needs to be addressed, because apart from reducing energy, which is one aspect, consumers have a huge impact. As we see right now in Europe, the reaction of consumers to these shortages, to these high prices of electricity and gas is very strong, and is having already a strong response from politicians and governments, and may actually overturn some of the European policies. Even COP26 is so strong. So we need to understand it. We need to see what drives it, and often it's nothing to do with, I'm afraid, climate change. It simply comes down to one thing: cost and energy poverty, and not wanting to see climate change, but not wanting to pay for it. And as a result, I think it should definitely be addressed as a subject. It has room, but in terms of reducing energy, the other subject that Cyprus and the region isn't tackling properly is energy efficiency. There are so many ways that are now being developed in Europe to reduce energy consumption through energy efficiency, and we're not going far enough in implementing these. I mean, I'm sure the places like Cyprus Institute can help, but it's not there. It's the government. It's the government that needs to provide the incentives and the direction and the policies required to achieve energy efficiency and bring costs down. I mean, looking at the Cyprus Energy Plan for 2030, we're paying lip service to it. We're not actually taking it very seriously. The government is not taking this whole thing very seriously. There's a lot that can be done, especially with buildings, heating and cooling.
Well, I think energy efficiency, it's substantial actual issues for the GCC countries. I mean, there is no price for electricity, it's zero.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to definitely now put real pricing. And in Kuwait, for example, it's zero, the cost for electricity. So people just keep their air conditioning running the whole time.
No incentive to do anything about it.
What is it? The behavior changes. I mean, it's in part important to understand. It's that the cooling really takes a lot of it in the Gulf countries, and it's funny is that they do very little. I usually need to put a sweater on when you are visiting some offices, you know. So this is something that's a cheap thing to do actually, to reduce this waste of waste, I consider it.
Indeed, we have touched upon the energy efficiency issue in the report of the Energy Task Force, we outlined the three basic pillars for the energy transition, and saying that we need interventions in all three aspects. One is good data and modeling, the foundations, as Steve Griffiths said. The second is mitigating the growth in energy demand, and the third one is the zero carbon or low carbon energy supply. Behavioral changes need costs as well, as exemplified in the Gulf countries, as you said, but also because, well, higher costs can induce changes even in areas where fossil fuels are not subsidized, and we need this.
But before you actually have change, you may have a revolution if higher prices.
Yes, this is the difficult balance that you have to keep.
Yeah, that's why you need behavior.
Indeed. George?
Yes, hello.
Are you commenting now as a researcher or as a representative of...
Both. Both. Just to mention that indeed energy efficiency should be one of the highest priority. This is one of the priorities of the EU with energy efficiency first principle. But however, you need to measure first. You need to see which measures you need to take, and thus the government here in Cyprus took some obligatory measures through the building law to force the some energy efficiency measures in all new buildings. So it's not in our planning as ministry, we provide incentives just to all buildings. However, the new buildings, they have to go with the new energy efficiency measures. Secondly, regarding the planning and the energy mix of the countries, what we have identified through the years, through the studies in EU, all these models we have seen usually take the big picture, the big perspective. They take the averages. They don't take the specificities of each country. So once you go deeper and examine from a different point of view, you can see and you can find out different policies that can help different countries. And talking at EU level, nobody's talking about heat waves, let's say, and nobody's talking about thermal storage because it's a technology that is not commonly used in most of the European countries. So what we can do as a region, we can focus on these technologies that it has a higher efficiency in our case, and try to promote it to other countries as well that they are out of this region. By introducing also new technologies, we have seen in IRENA in the last assembly meeting, the gravity storage technology, which is very high, is a very potential technology that can store mechanical energy instead of pump storage. So, and at a much lower cost. So all these figures are new for most of the countries. All these new technologies are new, and we need to investigate, find the right policies and measures as we do in our planning, revise them every as the new conditions apply. And of course, our first priority should be the prices to end users and of course to vulnerable consumers, and where is what is needed to apply specific policies and measures for this kind of consumers in order to avoid energy poverty even further. But in general, I think these kind of meetings are very useful. Nuclear energy, of course, is an option, but maybe not for Cyprus, maybe for other region, or even if the nuclear reactors are coming in a smaller scale and more secure, we overcome the security aspect, yes, we can try maybe for transport, aviation, or maritime fuels, because I see some marine vehicles now that they are based on nuclear energy. So everything can be combined, I think. And what we will need to do specific studies. Thank Cyprus Institute for providing support up to now.
Well, yes, technologically, solutions that are more tailored to the region and perhaps not that much addressed by European or other organizations that focus on other parts of the world are important. And probably this is a major aspect of the need for regional coordination. And I like this idea of Steve Griffiths of following this mission innovation approach and having some kind of secretariat and steering committee that would coordinate research needs in the area. And this could go hand in hand with policy because the two of them are closely connected. That's a matter that can be discussed. I don't know if he had any more specific idea. It could be intergovernmental, perhaps. Perhaps the research foundations of each country could form the steering committee, or it could be a more bottom-up initiative that would involve research institutions. But it also depends on who coordinates and who funds, I suppose. Anyway, Charles, you wanted?
They had this kind of steering committee in ESCO. They established a center for climate change policy, but nothing comes out of that. This was essentially for the Arab countries.
Yeah, yes.
So I think we should look at that experience first. To learn the mishaps, why it never works. But I think just to continue on comment on some of these points, last time I was in Cyprus, actually, I visited Cyprus solar installation. And I think this desalination is a must in the region. I mean, it's very unique. And now I was told about the forward osmosis. That kind of research and that technology to reduce the use of, I was told it could half the cost of energy, the amount of energy you need per meter cube water. I mean, this is very important. I mean, pursue that on the regional basis. I mean, the Research Institute already, Cyprus is doing this work. It can call for collaboration from the region. We definitely enjoy the interest in dissemination as well as all the GCC countries.
Indeed. And we were discussing with a big French research institution recently, and they said that because of climate change, all these technologies may not be relevant only for our region, but they may be increasingly relevant for South Europe, for example.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Looking ahead a little bit. So, so this may not be uninteresting also to some European research institutions, but again, here we have the urgent needs. Yes. You said that you could proceed with some policy recommendations, and I think it's good to, yes, not to forget to mention that.
Okay. So in the region, in the East Med and Middle East, energy decarbonization policy as far as I'm concerned, making hesitant, almost ad hoc steps and lacking ambition. For most governments in the region, it does not have the priority required, with many just doing enough to counter pressure from outside. Pressure from their populations is limited due to limited knowledge and understanding. A dearth of independent investigative media does not help. Abundant renewable resources are underexploited, as for example here in Cyprus. Many reasons are being cited for this, but most have solutions if one is willing to look for them and do something about it. These include antiquated electricity grids, isolated energy systems, inordinately complicated regulations and procedures, lack of appropriate policies and institutions, even lack of transparency and corruption. These are areas where this initiative can help provide solutions, or at least some direction. I mean, the research being done within the institute and others. New low emission development models are needed. Coming out of the pandemic, it is an ideal time to generate new policies to facilitate this, especially policies and financial conditions that can make it easier for private capital to invest in clean energy projects. Without private investment, transition to clean energy in the region will have limited success. And I speak to investors because they consult me all the time, and they're frustrated. They have ideas, they want to invest, they cannot, they can't go very far. So far, governments in the region are doing a Boris Johnson, big on words, but details light and thin on concrete plans. Happy to make nebulous promises that fade into the distant future, but paying scant attention to the needs for immediate strategic actions. All countries of the region need coherent and comprehensive strategic energy plans that map the way to net zero by 2050, not just 2030, with concrete step-by-step proposals to put this into effect in accordance to strict timetables. In a recently published report on financing clean energy transitions in emerging and developing economies, the International Energy Agency made detailed recommendations that include measures to enhance financial markets, improve the visibility of public policies, remove distortions from energy markets, enable grids to better integrate renewable power, empower local entrepreneurs to develop smaller scale clean energy solutions, as in energy efficiency, and build models for universal access to modern energy. These are their words, and all of that is covered in their report, which I recommend strongly that is consulted. The IEA states that it is clear that we are nowhere near mobilizing the level of funds that will be needed to achieve transition. This is why one of its most urgent recommendations is that governments give international finance institutions a stronger strategic mandate to finance clean energy transitions, coordinating clean energy policies and sharing resources and expertise in the region in order to achieve this is key. The outcome should be concrete plans and actions. The priority actions identified by the IEA for financing clean energy transitions applicable to the region are grouped in 4 main streams that include redoubling international support, tackling cross-cutting issues that affect investment risks and returns, scaling up private capital rapidly for clean power efficiency and electrification, and focusing on the hard aspects of transitions. They give detailed recommendations. I have them here, but I'm not going to read them. You can find them in the report. There's no point in spending a lot of time going to the details here. I do not believe in reinventing the wheel. That's why I have made full use of IEA's coherent recommendations. I believe that their adaptation and adoption can help the region move more confidently and purposefully in developing effective decarbonization policies. This is in the hands of regional governments. Only they can put in place the policies required to turn these recommendations to reality. The process of going from the present to a clean energy future will be messy and disruptive. Policy measures will not just evolve gradually and in a coherent manner, but without certainty, attracting or making long-term energy investment decisions will be challenging. Investors need certainty to put money into anything. Policymakers must develop tools to manage energy market volatility and protect consumers during the inevitably messy transition process, but also to deal with the inevitability of hotter summers and colder winters, abnormal wildfires, floods, droughts that are here to stay. They're not going away. Reducing demand for fossil fuels, through carbon taxes, as being done now in Europe and in other economies, can become burdensome on vulnerable, low to medium income households, becoming increasingly unable to cope with high energy costs, and may stop the whole process if we're not careful. That's why studying behavioral aspects is important. Policies need to be implemented to address this, as well as energy poverty, perhaps through sensible recycling of some of the revenues from such taxes going back to vulnerable households. Here the taxes collected from emission allowances are going to be massive this year. They may approach 200 million euros. Where is that going at the moment? It's going into the government coffers instead of plowed back into renewables, helping people.
Not only renewable support, zero.
Yes, that's what I'm talking. That money, if you read the European, if you read the European ETS handbook, it says specifically that some of it should be used to assist vulnerable households, and the rest should be plowed back into renewables, the grid, and so on. We're not doing it. And only last week, Kadri Simpson said, we in Europe cannot do much about these prices. It's down to governments to use that money and do something about it. What do? We force CAC to take money that it has for investment purposes and plow it back into subsidies. And that's crazy.
We have to think who are the big winners and who are the big losers.
So for me, this is a crazy way to handle it. Policies also need to be developed to reinvest such revenues to boost the share of renewables in the energy mix and energy storage, reduce emissions, mitigate and adapt to climate change. If affordability, reliability, and security of energy supplies are seen to be impacted adversely by climate change action, it will take support away by people. As a result of the current energy crisis, voices are already growing in Europe to slow down the implementation of new climate measures. In many countries of the region, regulatory policies are still too complex, bureaucratic, and cumbersome, slowing down or even discouraging the rapid and wider deployment of renewables and clean energy, discouraging investment. This needs to change and go beyond the rhetoric to action. Finally, in order to foster regional cooperation, the East Med Gas Forum, we have that institution in place already, should be renamed as the East Med Energy Forum and expand its remit to include all aspects of energy. Gas is gone, something of the past. Let's move away from that. Look at the whole of the energy issues. With natural gas in the region losing its export potential, it should be used to support the wider deployment of renewables and energy transition. The forum is a body that fosters cooperation and has the potential to promote coordinated policy responses to energy decarbonization in the region.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask, going to one of your first suggestions, talking about the antiquated electricity grid. And of course, trying not to focus too much on Cyprus, because we have to look at the regional aspect, which of course this is very relevant for the region, for many countries of the region as well. I would like to ask, I don't know if Konstantinos knows the answer or perhaps someone else. Is this, I mean, for example, Cyprus is going now to have you could say massive deployment of smart meters. Would that be a low-cost solution for other countries of the region, which would be, I guess it would be very important for demand-side management. It would probably not be sufficient in order to promote energy efficiency. You need policies or tariffs, but it's certainly important to have a smart grid. Would that be one of the low-cost solutions to improve energy efficiency?
Markets are going to cost about 7 million for 500,000. So I don't know if that's cheap or not, but smart meters can do several things. One, they inform consumers about their consumption.
Yeah.
They also make them active consumers. They participate directly to the market. So it closes the gap between retail and wholesale. That's the big advantage of smart meters. And plus, with smart homes, you can increase energy efficiency by controlling your devices, your electrical appliances, but it also helps with balancing the grid. So it also helps with integrating more renewables because prices are lower when you have excess generated from renewables, so consumers tend to consume more. So smart meters are part of the solution, yes.
Because I'm wondering, for example, building energy renovations in buildings take time. They may be very cost effective, but it's not necessarily very easy for countries in the Middle East to do this massively.
Not all buildings are suitable.
Not all buildings are suitable. Not all know-how is available. Not all human resources are necessarily available if you want to renovate, I don't know, thousands of buildings per year in a mid-sized country. So perhaps would smart meters be a cost-effective enabler that could be relevant for several countries? And I'm not talking about Gulf countries. I'm talking about other countries of the region, Lebanon, Jordan, countries low to middle, Egypt, low to middle income. I don't know if anyone has a view on this.
EU directives are wise. EU directives require the implementation of smart meters. So it must be under this assumption that then smart meters are
But it's only one aspect. There are other things.
It's part of the solution.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a good thing that this investment is being made here in Cyprus. But when I ask why don't we employ more renewables, I came here, did a study in 2015 and said we can go up to 40% renewables. They tell me, no, the grid cannot handle it. And yet we are not investing to upgrade the grid to accept more renewables.
The grid itself is quite strong, but we're going through transformation. We're going from the centralized generation to the decentralized generation. So the distribution network needs to be strengthened in areas that, especially photovoltaics, are suitable. The land use right now, there is this new plan for the general planning on where photovoltaics should be installed. It's a multi-criterion plan. So it's not that it is the grid, it's the land usage, it's the even network losses, cost. It's a multi-variable problem.
But I do think it's an area where institutions should get involved to develop coherent, comprehensive policies, help the government in implementing some of these policies rather than hobby horses of individuals.
Yes. Sava, from your very long experience in so many projects, even in Europe, what do you think that would induce energy efficiency improvements more strongly and cost effectively? Would you single out one or two kinds of measures? I understand you need many. You need a combination. We started talking about smart grids, but there could be building energy performance required, but could be education.
Yeah, the one that is very close to the understanding of the people and the general public is energy efficiency and the small scale renewables. So of course, these two are no a matter of discussion anymore. So people are aware, they ask for the best for their houses, for their buildings, for their business, and there are incentives from the government and solutions from the market. So this is not something for discussion anymore. Energy awareness and energy behavior is something that we need to work. We have seen the change throughout the years. Since the beginning of the agency 12 years ago, we have seen that it's getting better and better. and we have experimented different behaviors from the consumers. One example that I can share with you is when we had the financial crisis in Cyprus. So we had the haircut, as is taught, the bank's deposits haircut during the weekend, and the day after, the electricity consumers, they have decreased their energy needs in a day, I don't know, around 20%. So there is a lot of waste energy around the community. So if we focus on that, then the technological solutions will give the answer for the objectives on climate change.
Okay, let's move to Konstantinos and then to George.
Konstantinos. I would tend to, I would disagree with some of what Savas has said. Consumer behavior depends on two things: on how much they know and how much it costs. And the environmental concerns are not that important to them. And to give a measure of that, we have what we call the guarantees of origin, which is a voluntary way to support renewables, for example. And their price is so low. I mean, people are not interested in buying them, even though it looks good on a company to show that their energy is green. So I would say that the one big effort should be done to inform consumer what's best for them, what's best for their pockets. Replacing, for example, very energy non-efficient appliances. That would be a policy. But it also would help to have green taxes. I mean, to reform the policy, taking into consideration the vulnerable consumers, but we should increase taxes on carbon and being neutral on the public, and maybe through social measures to support the vulnerable consumers more. But the government should be neutral on income, but while having an effect on energy consumption. In Cyprus, we had a counter measure on that. We reduce the taxes on fossil fuels, for example. This was counterproductive.
Thank you, George. Since we talk about carbon taxes, first of all, we need to think about fossil fuel subsidies in so many countries of the region. Yes, George.
Yes, just a small comment on your previous question about the smart meters. Smart meters, yes, is a good measure as far as it comes with other policy measures, as you said. So I have seen today the different prices in Spain and Portugal, where they have almost half price during the day through the night. It was 12 euro cents, over 24 euro cents in the 8 o'clock in the night. This was the forecast. So having these real market conditions working, yes, smart meters can make a lot of sense. But in countries where market is not really active, I have some doubts if it will really help. Okay, secondly, the other option, I will totally agree with Savas. Awareness is very crucial issue. And unfortunately, one way for people to learn about some technology is to have incentives. Otherwise, from our experience, we are going to announce a new support scheme about replacing all the refrigerators and all the air conditioning units and some other appliances. Of course, some people they are doing it anyways, but if you don't measure it, you don't know it. So it's another issue that monitoring on these devices has not been happening yet in Cyprus. I am not aware, except one study we did with the air conditioned units, where we found out that we have a lot of recent equipment in Cyprus comparing with other countries. Other than that, we don't know how old are the fridges in the houses, how old are the cooking devices. And yes, we need data in order to perform better. You cannot improve something if you cannot measure it.
Yes.
We're talking about Cyprus. Maybe you can just enlighten us about, you said that you don't believe with liberalized market. What's the market in the electricity market actually in Cyprus?
No, he said that smart meters cannot be effective if the market does not operate.
What is it? What's the market in Cyprus? Regulated market or liberalized market?
The theory is liberalized, but the wholesale market is going to be operational sometime next year, in about a year. Because we are building the software for suppliers, producers, and market participants to bid and cover. But if I may add, for smart meters to be effective, you need something else. You need to link the price to the consumer to the wholesale market. So suppliers must offer, for example, a tariff that is linked to the wholesale, to the 1 hour or half hour price, in order for smart meters to be effective.
But you need to have market.
Wholesale market change every half hour or every hour, but you need to give the incentive to the consumer through the smart meter that would measure the consumer consumption for 1 hour. That now the price is low. You consume more. Now the price is high. Don't consume so much.
But you will see that in this meter, the consumer, he will see the price. You also can buy from X.
Yeah. The consumer doesn't buy from both. Consumer buys from the supplier. You have to link the retail price and the wholesale.
Why do you need suppliers? Why can't you buy that?
That's how market works. That's how it works.
No, in Britain it's different.
market where suppliers sell. They agree to the
So they're buying from the wholesale and sells to the consumer.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we can of course continue the discussions, but we can release. We have a few people in GoToMeeting, I think also some on Facebook. But in any case, thank you very much for this workshop and for these interventions and for getting ready for this in a very limited period of time. For those of you who will be at the main conference, of course, we can continue the discussions there and the interventions as well.
Can we actually get copies of the presentations? People?
I think so, but we can ask also the other panelists as well. Yes, sure.
What report?
You can get in touch immediately directly.
Yeah.
But the IEA report probably, yes, on finance.
No,
He will explain. I don't know if were you talking about a report of yours?
The two reports I presented.
Yes.
I'll send you PDF and you can circulate.
Yeah, I think I have the IEA one on financing, but
no, but also my.
Your report. Okay. Yes, of course.
The IEA.
They are
find it.
Yes, of course. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to the online attendees.
What do